Okay, so now that we're in Houdini, and for those who've never used Houdini, this might seem really daunting, but really it's fairly basic principles inside this program, and I think you just have to sort of get used to the knowledge and the language and sort of the terms that are being used. But I'm just going to type geo for geometry, and I get sort of this container thing, and nothing's there. You're like, okay, well, what was the point of that? It'd be the same thing as if you were in C40. Again, this is my standard setup. This wouldn't even be there to begin with. You'd be like, well, what do I do? Um, I guess you'd be like, well, here's a box. Let me click it. Okay, I have a box. Okay, I want a sphere. Here's a sphere. Where's the sphere? Oh, it's in the same spot. So you have to move it. Oh, I want another one. Let me... I learn over time. Okay, I can press control and make another one and move it over here. Well, what if I want this cube to control that sphere? Oh, I guess I put it as a child, and then I could rotate this around and move it. I think people take this sort of idea and these concepts for granted because you're used to the program. Houdini is the same thing. Like, you go in it, you just wouldn't know what to do. So say I delete that. Say I was even to press box. Oh, there's a box. What if I pressed sphere? There's a sphere. Wait, I don't see them. Where's the other one? Oh, well, it's probably in the same spot, so I gotta move it over. Let's just move it a little less. Move it over. Okay, I want another one. Maybe I gotta... Oh, my control doesn't work. Oh, it's Alt. Oh, now this was -3. Maybe I want +3 or 6. So off to the side. Oh, no, 3 would work. It's the same principles. Now, if you're like, well, I have this cube and I have this sphere, how do I make them work together? Well, you could try the same thing, and let's just try to rotate one. There you go. Like, that's literally the same principles. It goes deeper than this, but I just mean, for those who haven't used this program before, just get used to playing around and doing beginner tutorials, and you'll start to get more a sense of things. The thing that gets people tripped up, I think, is with these boxes, or not these boxes, these geometry containers, you can go inside of them, and then there's the real box. And in here, I can create more work. Like, I can do more things. And that's sort of where Houdini starts to get deeper and deeper. So I'm just going to get rid of this. That was just quick primer. Now we'll get onto the actual details. So again, I output the Alembic from C40, and then I've brought it into Houdini. So we're just going to go through sort of my build. So in here, you can see I have this Alembic, and it's really big, and it's got all these elements in there. And the reason for that is that essentially we need to split this up. So I've created this sort of offset, which is to basically change my timeline. So now the animation starts at 100 versus it's static for the first part and then goes there. I then transformed it really small. And the reason I've done this is because of the scale difference between Houdini and C4D. So right now I'm getting some weird settings, but let's just change that. And then all I've done here is split it out with a blast, which is basically a way of saying I want to delete everything besides the one that's not selected, or I want to delete that thing. So here I've separated out the branch, separated out the leaf, separated out the frog. That's all this is doing. And then I've just named these and put folders around them so I understood what I was doing. And basically all I'm doing is taking this leaf, which right now it doesn't look like it has any geometry, and converting it, basically taking it out of a alembic, converting it, and then it has some UVs on it. I'm then freezing the first frame, adding more geo to it, so I'm remeshing it, so it's going from this to this, so it's more even topology. And the reason I'm doing this is so when the rain hits, there's more even distribution of geometry, so it doesn't sort of freak out if it was to hit something like this. these big planes, maybe it slides weird and sort of intersects and goes sort of funky, but this is a more uniform base. And then all I'm doing is saying this remesh version, point deform it back to the animation, meaning make it move. So then it moves. And then I'm adding normals, and then I'm adding a null called out collider leaf. It's really important to name things clearly in Houdini, because again, in C4D land, you know, you could have everything sort of in childs of children of children of children of children, and it just keeps going and going and going. And maybe you as the user understand this, but if you were to give this to somebody else, you'd have to sort of explain that to them, right? In Houdini, it just shows it all for you, and it's better that you sort of give names and organize things. The other blast, say, is for this branch. I'm doing the exact same settings. I'm just converting it, freezing the first frame, making sure the topology is even with a remesh, and point deforming it back to the animation. And then giving it a null, and then I'm doing the exact same thing with the frog. So you can see the topology, I remeshed it, point deformed it, it goes back to it, and gave it a name. So these nulls are essentially the pointers that I can use in other places to point to these separate objects. And then I'm just merging them back together just for cleanliness sake. Then that was my collider. So you can see, like, I can have them on, but I can also turn them off, and I just know they're there and I can use them for other things. Here's the frog geometry just to show you an example. Like, I have an object merge. So if I just tab, put object merge, there'll be nothing here, but in the object you can pick. So the whole point is you name things properly. Like you can see collider, anything with a capital goes to the top of the list. So just like C4D, you have all of these things with children and children and children and children, but that can be really messy, but it gives you this option to rename anything with a capital up top. So then I just picked the out collider frog, press accept, and there it is. And that's what this is. So that's just there. And then my rain setup, when I go inside of here, it might seem, again, complicated, but really all it is I have my collider objects, and then I have particles falling down and hitting this. So what does this all, how does this all exist? So the first thing I have is a grid, and it's literally just a grid above my scene. I just moved it up. And then I have this thing called a pop net, which basically this is where all the magic's happening in terms of calculating the particles. In here, this might seem, again, complex, but the whole purpose of this is just to give you a better understanding, overview of things. So I have my grid, I have my collider objects, and at this box at the bottom is sort of like a kill zone. And then I have my particles that fall down, and as you can see, they die because of this box. So when if you were to look at this thing, you know, the biggest thing right now is this thing has a brain. It's called the pop solver. This solves the particles. This is basically how you feed in the particles to come in. And then let's skip that for a second. And up top here, I have this thing called source, pop source. So the pop source is the grid. And it says mission type, scatter onto surface, which is that grid. Geometry source, use first context geometry. All that means is use the first dot, use this first context, which is the grid. You could theoretically not have them even attach, and then you could pick an object, and then it would give you this sort of link here, and then you could pick, oh, I want to pick literally that grid. But I just ended up using the first context. Then all I have here, and these are just my own notes I put inside of files, I just like to make stuff clean as possible, is, you know, this is like a behavior. What should it do if it collides with something? Well, I want it to make a name called hit group and call it and make it red. So these particles will fall, and if it hits anything in the scene that's considered a collider, it will turn red. So as you can see, certain particles are hitting the leaf, and every now and then they'll hit the branch and they'll turn red. So that's what that first thing does. Okay, that just makes it change to a color, but that's all it does. Next I have it say, well, since you're now in this group called hit group and you're red, let's turn on bounce. It's computer language 0 and 1, on and off. So bounce equals 1. Let's give you some wind. Let's make it go down a little faster and swirl a little bit. And then after that, let's make you go into a group called main. And now you're in the group called main. That's all that first thing does, and that's why I call it main. What happens after that? Well, some of these that are in the hit group, remember it turns to red, will turn into a splash. They'll then make a few extra particles, 4, and will change to a point. I've added sort of, these are just velocities, so it will inherit some of the velocity, and then it'll be sort of varied. Basically, this is so when it hits, like you can see right here, and I'll make these dots bigger. When it hits, it will go turn to that hit group, red, and do a bit of variation on them. So I get a few more. And then it'll bounce. And then it'll turn into a splash group. And then over here, I have another one called, again, this is using hit group, so it's taking some of them from the hit group. This time only adding 1 extra particle, and it will basically die really quickly. And there'll be no bounce. And then it'll turn into a spawn. So the whole point is this main group is the white ones falling down. Then it will turn red. Some of them will turn into a splash. We'll create 4 of them. Some will create 1 new particle and it will die really quickly with no bounce. And will turn into a spawn, which will then move over to this group called spawn. And will then give me these light blue ones that will then basically have no bounce. The spawn, this is just saying drag, like make it really, really slow. I've added this expression, but it doesn't need to be there. All it's saying is randomize sort of the friction and the cling, so they won't all stick to the leaf perfectly the same amount. This 450, they'll sort of be a range. They'll multiply by this range and sort of be a little random, so they won't all slide perfectly like a mechanical thing. Like some will be a little stickier, some will be a little less sticky. And then, you know, I have them change to a group called run. And then they'll just have some, basically this is some velocity force, so it'll slow it down a bit more. And then those are all getting merged together. And remember, I talked about that kill box, so it just kills anything that would fall out of the scene. And that's all this is really doing. And you might be wondering, well, okay, that sounds fine, but how does it know what to hit? And how does it understand what the leaf is, what the branch is on this other side below the solver, there's this merge. And there's these 2 things here I have called static solvers. If you just press tab and press static object, you'll get one. And it's asking for a path, you know, object path. And all I've done is I've linked in my branch and linked in my leaf. So if I was just to silhouette this is just a leaf. Again, where's that coming from? Collider out leaf. So if I was to go to that, it just jumped me to this. So that's all I'm looking at right now. And then there's my branch. And then there's my frog. So again, Houdini, you know, it's just a different way of thinking, but it's really, really intelligent what it's doing. And I think it's a lot smoother and quicker to sort of simulate things. So all I've done then on my leaf is I've changed the physical property. So my bounce is a little different. And then with the branch, the bounce is a little stronger, and the friction and the scale of that friction, so it slides a bit more. So it can stick on and slide a bit. So when that's all combined together, I'm just jumping now to, I cached out that simulation. All it's doing is the white ones fall, they then turn into this red group called hit. When they turn into that hit group, they will turn a few of them to splashes. Some of them will also generate just one particle and then sort of just stick and slide. And then that friction that's different per frame for different sections is because of that randomized sort of dragon collision. So that way, not all of them are sliding perfectly at once. They're, sort of moving a little bit at a time. And you can see it's remeshed, so the leaf is better for this. And you can see over here, like, it's really accumulating over here. It's just out of the shot with the branch. Over here, it gets a few sections, and they sort of accumulate, and they fall down. So that's just the particles. So again, I just showed you that to show you, like, the size of them. But, they're literally just dots. You're not going to be able to do much with this. So then what I've done is, in this next section, is made these white ones, sort of called the main. I've made them thicker and fall down. These splash ones, I've given a shape, and they are really small because it's just these red dots that just die off really quickly. And then this trickle is turned into VDB, which would be the same thing as like your mesher and C4D, and pulled them out of the leaf. So there'll be some thickness, but also it doesn't intersect with the leaf, so it doesn't penetrate and looks like a real drop wood. So now if I go down to here, let's look at the main. So all I've done is I've created a sphere. I picked one point on it with a group. I softly transformed that group, that one point, roughened up the whole thing, and smoothed it out. And that's my drop. Then what I've done is on all the points that are white, essentially I've said copy to them on the main target points these particles. Well, this sphere. So now they'll fall, and we'll just do that. So that's my main falling. They're not doing anything. They don't touch anything. They just keep falling. And since it's going so quickly, it doesn't really matter what's happening. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it for the main ones. Then what I've done for the splash is, again, gone to the particles. And these are going to be the red ones. And I've done sort of the same principle, but this time I've taken this sphere and just made it really, really low, because it doesn't matter. It's going to die off really quickly, and I'm going to smooth it in C4D, and then copied that to points. And it's just to the splash this time. So you can see that all those names matter, and they really help you organize things. And you can see really close up, that's what they look like. All this Wrangle is doing is saying the scale of these points, make them a bit random, and make them multiplied by 0.03. So they're not all going to be the same size as one another. Without this, they'd all be the same size. And you can see that they're big because, they're just going to populate, die off. So I've just made them super small, and they just randomly will be based on that scale. Then what I've done is taken the leaf, and I've actually cut them out from that. So when they hit, they'll sort of cut off from that. It's just to make sure it feels a bit more realistic. And then again, the third and final one was these rain particles are falling down, and now I'm looking at the blue ones. The blue ones sort of stick, and they sort of slide, and then over time they'll stick, and then they'll fall off the edge. I'm just looking at right here. So they just fall off the edge. So what do I do with these blue ones? Well, I'm going to get rid of everything else. So I just have those blue dots. I'm then going to make them VDBs from particles, which allows me to then do sort of what you do with a mesher. And you can see already like what's happening. So again, like they just populate because they're getting hit from the original ones, and then they just sort of gather and fall off. But again, these don't look real. They're not like really combined or anything. They're not smooth. So what I ended up doing is, again, I took that leaf, I made it into a polygon, VDB, smoothed it, and then I'm actually booleaning out. So if I go close, you'll see that these have a flat surface versus just being round. And it's these little things that start to make things feel realistic in, your work. So I'm just cutting out the leaf from the drops. Then I'm turning them back into actual geometry. And, they're just going to slide down, be geometry and smoothed. So they're not so jagged. And then I just added a bit of velocity. So the velocity is just coming from the original points. And then, just like I had before, I have an out main, which is just the drops, an out splash, which is just going to be my splashes. Let's get a better angle. It's just going to be my splashes. And they just dive really quickly. As you saw, they just will randomly populate. And then I have my actual running, dripping points. And then I've just merged them all together. And then that gives me everything. So now that I have that, I have all my rain. The colliders are there just for me as reference. And I have my camera from C4D. So, I'm looking through here, making sure everything looks right, feels good. Once I was happy with that, I then took the rain and then cleaned out some of these parameters. Because again, Houdini is all about information, but when you want to export, you want it to be as compact as possible. So I don't need all this information that was needed for making them. So I just ended up deleting a whole bunch of parameters with something called an attribute delete. Took out the groups that I didn't need anymore and scaled them up. Because again, this is going to C4D. So, this is the scale before, super, super small, and then this is what it's that. And then I have something called a ROP, which is a render output alembic. And I just said I need frame 101 to 461. Because again, the first 100 frames, nothing's moving properly. And then after that, that's when the animation of the frog and the branch and stuff kicks in. So once I was happy with that, I exported that out to C4D.